Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Clay Township Board. This is Tuesday, April 18th, 2023. I call the meeting to order. Our first order of business is our Pledge of Allegiance. Mary, would you lead us?
I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance
to
to
the
the
flag
flag
of
of
the
the
United
United
States
States
of
of
America
America
and
and
to
to
the
the
republic
republic
for
for
which
which
it
it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God, indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and
and
justice
justice
for
for
all.
all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Do we have any public comments tonight? Hearing none, our first order would be approval of minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes from our February 7th annual report meeting?
I so move.
Any comments?
No.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries 3-0. We do have a public hearing tonight for an additional appropriation from the General Fund 0101. I would open the public hearing to any comments from the audience. Are there any public comments? Hearing none, we will close the meeting at 6:02 p.m. We move on to action items. Our first action item is Resolution 2023-04-1801, an additional appropriation from the General Fund 0101. Paul, would you like to comment on this? Do we want to comment on these individually?
We can comment on everyone, but I'm gonna let Angie comment on this. She probably can explain it better than I can.
Angie, we need you on a mic, please.
Thank you, Angie Stino with Crow. So before you use a resolution to approve the additional appropriation out of the general fund, there are two amounts there. One for 150,000. The other is other services and charges of approximately 185,000. The other services and charges is related to the remaining amount of lit that is owed to Carmel Clay Parks as part of the park interlocal. That amount was lower than it should have been when the budget was adopted last year. So this really is just getting them up to that amount that's owed to the parks. In addition, the 150,000, that was a line item that actually had been included in the original 2023 budget, was removed and then needed to get back in. So really just getting that in for the building. I believe that's the security on the building is the 150. I'm trying to see if I have any detail on what that is. I don't know. Complex expenses of 150. So these are just nothing really new, not really a new ask, just items that were omitted that need to be paid by the township.
Okay, let's have a motion and a second, and we can ask any questions. May I have a motion for approval?
I so move.
Second? Are there any comments? Go ahead.
Like Michael or Angie, since our rating day fund is getting depleted, why couldn't we appropriate this out of the non-reverting fund?
For which expense are you?
Catch up to the parks.
That was just where the lit comes from because all the lit is deposited into the general fund. This is the amount of lit that's actually owed to the park. So normally it would be transferred to the non-reverting fund.
A pile of money in the non-reverting fund that would be an easier burden for the township to bear if it didn't come out of the general fund. I mean, we can still give them the money they're owed, but it could come out of non-reverting fund instead of general fund. They're just asking me. I mean, I don't.
I guess I would answer the non-reverting fund already represents dollars that are already allocated to the parks. This is above and beyond what's allocated. These dollars are not sitting in the reverting fund. It's still owed to them from the 2023 lit.
Forever, they've had to save. We've had to hold back over $1 million for over a decade. How many years? All I'm saying is there's plenty of interest that's probably been generated on that, even at 0.01. So not all the money in there is theirs. You know, we never agreed to give them the interest that had accumulated. So we should be able to pay them out of that. I mean, I'm not sure if it's prudent anymore to hold on to taxpayer dollars in that fund when we've gone through COVID and everything else without ever having to touch it.
And I will let Michael or even Paul. I guess this is more of a policy discussion. I'm really just kind of presenting on the numbers and the math. So
Between the you, it's just-
I will step aside and let others address that.
As far as the use of the interest and with that component, that's more. I'll have to defer to Paul or the board as to how you would like to use the interest and account for that. If I understand the situation correctly, the 185, what was appropriated for parks in the non-reverting, well, in the general fund that was intended to go to parks, the lit that's attributable to the Central Park Bond and obligated to parks under the interlocal, was underestimated for last year. So this is the makeup to make sure that that full amount, the contractual amount that the township is responsible for, is provided. The logistics of how that goes, I'll defer to the board as to how you best want to address that.
Michael, my question is there are things we want to do in the future,
Mhm.
and depleting the general fund does not help accomplish those goals. So I just want to make sure that you getting your $185,000 doesn't impact something.
Sure. Can appreciate that.
Can you explain that any better?
Matt, are you suggesting it come out of the 1215?
Yes.
So the money that's in the 1215 per the interlocal agreement was transferred over, and through those years, amounts were appropriated. You know, it wasn't always the full amount appropriated per year, and so there's this remainder that builds up in there. The 185 is the additional amount due under the interlocal for this year. And so that money that's in the 1215, while it's being held by the township, is the park's money. And the interest it accumulated is all attributable to the parks under the interlocal.
No.
So this 1215,
That's debatable, but I'm just questioning the wisdom of asking for $185,000 that is owed to you, but at this time when I think you're working on something else.
Honestly, I didn't know this particular item was on here. I was actually coming here for number 2, so this is.
So I think we should rethink.
This is money that we owe.
And Matt, I can add to
We owe this
that.
money to the.
I know we do.
But does it need to come out of this?
Does it have to happen right now? And I
And-
think
And I would just say, and for Michael's benefit, he didn't come to us and say, "Hey, sir, are we still owed money?" When we were kind of shoring up after getting advice from State Board of Accounts, that was part of that exercise. So, which I think you're clear on getting that, but you know, he didn't come to say, "I need my 185." We were just shoring up the amount that was owed under the interlocal. And
is there do you have that money? Are you spending that money in the next month? So I think more discussion should be had before we move that money.
well, we have a motion and a second on the table to appropriate the money from the general fund. We can either vote on that or have a different motion to amend that particular motion. If you are convinced that we need to table this or change the motion, then we'd have to change it. And I don't know if, I understand what you're saying. You're going to want this money soon. You're going to spend it this year, no doubt, I would think. Or is it just a buffer in your, the money, if I may, and Michael, you can certainly speak. And we'll get into this in later resolutions, but the money that Parks has been appropriated in their budget will still remain, will be drawing down out of the 1215 fund. This money, again, we'll address it in later resolutions, would just be transferred over to a Parks account and would have to be appropriated in later years for them to use. So your point, Matt, is we're going to give them the money at some point soon, if not tonight, and does it make sense to take it out of the general fund as opposed to the non-reverting fund?
I think there's a more global conversation that needs to be had about parks initiatives this year, how we can help the parks, and taking money out of the general fund right now, I don't think is the wise thing to do.
From Parks' perspective, the 185,000 is not critical to us in the immediate future. So if the board is inclined to take some additional time and address, I mean, that's not going to adversely impact parks. So it truly is up to the
And how do
board's
we
discretion.
Defer the motion right now.
We change it.
All right.
We have a motion to amend the motion, which we can do because we haven't voted on the appropriation. All we've done is move and second the appropriation, awaiting vote. If somebody feels strongly that they want to amend the motion, then do it. Will it get seconded? Maybe, and then we can vote on that if you feel like you want to change the amendment or the motion.
Go ahead, Matt, if you want.
I would move that we amend the resolution to only include the $150,000 on the table and table the $185,000 line item transfer.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Do we need further discussion on that before we vote?
All we're doing is tabling it for another time.
Right. Somebody might want to comment. Hearing none, all those in favor of basically tabling the general fund money to a later date for discussion and voting only on the $150,000 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. Motion carries 2-1. We will table that for a later discussion. But the $150,000 has been approved. Moving on to resolution 2023,
Wait a minute, I gotta write this down.
resolution 2023-04-1802 regarding the Central Park Lit Fund. Is this you, Angie, or?
Angie and I could probably tag team it if you want. I'll go ahead and start. So resolution 2023-04-1802 and 03 kind of are together. So I'll give you a general background and then we'll walk through each resolution. In prior budget years, prior to 2023, the lit came in and it was automatically receipted into either the 1215 fund or
Township assistance.
township assistance.
Or general fund.
Or the general, and it was expended from those funds. SBOA, State Board of Accounts, gave advice that they would take exception if the funds were not deposited into the general fund. So the 2023 budget was established, and those lit funds were deposited into a line item titled Transfer Lit to Other Funds, with the hopes that we would be able to get a resolution with SBOA that we could then receipt those funds to general fund and then transfer them to where we'd previously spent them from. SBOA subsequently gave advice that they would not allow that the funds had to be receipted to the general fund and terminally expended from the general fund. So what you have in resolution number 2 is acknowledgement that those lit funds were receipted into the general fund, and then parks will be invoicing the township for the money that's due to parks under the interlocal agreement. That money will go to parks. Parks will deposit it into an account with the city of Carmel. Upon advice of the township, that account is titled Central Park Lit Funds. So there's recognition that that money came from the township. And then also pursuant to the city's ordinance, there has to be signing to the township. So while it's being transferred over to the city accounts, there's still recognition that those are township funds, and the township has credit for that money that goes to parks, but it will be terminally expended to at the city.
So this is, both of these are pretty pro forma, but we need to vote on them separately.
Correct. It's just keep a trail of why we're doing what we're doing.
Okay.
So this STEM, there's a lot of conversation about this. Originally, the State Board of Accounts kind of put the kibosh on things. and that was nobody's fault. That was
Correct.
But I think originally what they wanted us to do was just transfer it over to the city, and then we were going to hope the city gave the parks what they wanted. That was kind of like one of the initial, and then we said no. Michael needs to. We made it more cumbersome so that they couldn't land in a city general fund, and then either Michael doesn't see it or the city all of a sudden becomes these heroes giving the parks department all this money, even though it came from the township. That is why this sounds very cumbersome, but it felt like the right thing to do to keep the township in the loop.
Mr.
Is that,
Chairman,
is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, when we first started discussing this, we were trying to put it back into the reverting fund, but we had to deposit all the money into the general fund. That's when Angie was told, no, you can't do that. We have to do it. And we had a meeting with the parks and their part of their board members. And it was a long discussion on how we were going to do it. And Matt and myself and Debbie felt that we needed to make sure that if we're going to give it to them, and Michael's in favor of it, that we gotta have recognition. So they have to create an own account at the city with our money going into it. There'll be a non-reverting fund for them there also, but it's gonna have to have approvals and things like that. They just can't go out and spend it and stuff.
The other concern was, even if they label it parks, the city's definition of parks is not the same definition that the Carmel Clay Parks and Rec and the township's definition of parks is. So we didn't want them spending it on something they might deem a park that wasn't a Michael park.
Right, I get it.
Yeah, so this way it's going into the non-reverting fund that the park board has control over. And additionally, the way the current local is written, because this is funding that is coming from the township, I'm going to encourage to make sure, and I encourage both the township board to closely watch when the city council is doing the workshops, but it's important that at least during the parks component of the presentation, that the township be part of that workshop, because these are funds that you also have a say over. And if, the township isn't in agreement with how the city council, that falls under how the interlocal addresses that. So it's important that the township be a party of those workshops as you used to be when you provided funding for our general fund, and make sure that the township gets the recognition and the say that it deserves for the funding that it's providing to parks and for our capital development.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adopt Resolution 2023-04-1802 regarding Central Park Lit?
So moved.
Second,
Any further discussion?
no.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries 3-0. Resolution 2023-04-1803 regarding the interlocal cooperation agreement, which Michael just explained.
Yes.
May I have a motion for approval?
I so move.
Second. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. The next action item is Resolution 2023-04-1805, authorizing issuance of credit cards.
All four.
04. Just jumping ahead, just making sure you're paying attention. 2023-04-1804, 2023-04-1804, declaration of surplus property. Mr. Henson.
What this is, with the IT moving in there, we had all the furniture and stuff in there, because when Tricol left, they left the furniture, so it became part of the townships. So we had to dispose of it, and before we could dispose of it, we had to at least have approval. We've since disposed of it before the resolution, but we needed something to show that we have the authority to dispose of assets of like the furniture and stuff. And a lot of it went to, where'd it go, Debbie?
It's here in the resolution, the
Matthew 25 Center.
And Doug, it had a zero. I mean, it was worthless.
It was
I mean, on
just
the market.
depreciated out, but we
So,
still had assets there we needed to. I can't just go throw it in the trash. As soon as we did, somebody would say
I
something.
thought there was like it was underneath a certain dollar amount.
Yeah,
So,
$5,000.
yeah. under $5,000 you can dispose of without public notice.
And that's what we did.
Yeah.
Because it was
And
not.
based on the IRS depreciation guidelines, this was worthless. And so Paul had the authority to do it, had to do it in an emergency, but this just comes back and ratifies, and just for public notice, letting everybody know that we followed the rules.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adopt Resolution 04-1804?
So moved.
Second. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. Now let's talk about that credit card, Paul. 04-1805, authorizing issuance of a credit card.
What this is, I got here, Debbie's buying stuff online, buying stuff that we need for the office and using her own personal credit card. And we're reimbursing her, and there's times where I'm not there to sign the check. So she's writing the check and signing the check and reimbursing herself. So we got a little problem here, checks and balances. So make it simple. I thought we needed a corporate credit card that we could buy these supplies. We don't have to worry about if somebody's out buying something and putting their personal stuff in on that receipt or anything like that. We can check it. We'll have the bills plus we have to keep the bills, the receipts plus the statements together in a file so you'll know what those all are. So at least we have a way of ensuring safety that way.
Have we never had this before?
Never had a credit card.
That's amazing.
Yes. it is.
And it's very low limits on them too. I was like 2,500 or maybe 5,000 a max. So I kept it very low and working on getting that approved if we could.
Was that, you kept it low because of logic or because of who's using it?
Because I didn't think we needed to spend that
Or
much.
both?
I didn't think we needed to spend that much.
Kidding. All right, let's have a motion. Who will motion to authorize the issuance of a credit card?
I so moved.
Second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Last action item, 2023 Trico Regional Sewer Utilities Board appointment, concurrence letter, Jeffrey W. Kimball.
Mr. Kendall's been on the Trico board for 2 terms of 4 years each, and he wanted to be reappointed. I talked to Drew over at the Regional Waste District. He really likes him, does a nice job, so we appointed him to be reappointed for another 4 years.
Excellent. May I have a motion to approve the appointment of Mr. Kimball?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Those are all the action items. We'll move on to information items. Update on township assistance.
In your packet, I gave you what we've spent for the year to date, each month on assistance and how many people we've helped. And that number is growing drastically this month. We only have one investigator this month because Tim Green fell and got hurt, and won't probably be back till May. He says he's coming back, but I don't know if he will. So we only got one investigator, so they're doing a great job and staying very busy.
So Paul, it looks like year to date, if I do the math right, we have given just under $12,000 in total assistance.
That's correct.
Any questions from the board?
I don't have any.
And we broke it down to rent, utilities, and the miscellaneous was a burial.
Thank you for the form.
This is great. Thank
That's
you.
that's something we've never had. It's really neat to get. Thank you.
As a member of the former board, we never had that. And when I saw 2 things on this, I saw people write articles that we never spent money.
Yes.
Yes.
I got proof now that if they ever ask you, we got proof that we do spend it and we spend it very wisely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next information item, 2023 Carmel Clay Parks Board appointment. D. Garrettson.
This is just a reappointment of Jim Garris, who's been on the park board 16 years or so, or 12. He's 12 years. This will be 16, if he says this was 16. I've talked to Michael about it. He's done a great job, and so he wanted to be reappointed. So Doug had talked to me about this before he left, so I just went ahead and reappointed him.
Do you have term limits, Michael?
Comments from the board? Personally, I think Jim Garrettson is an absolute ultimate asset to the city of Carmel. Always has been as a teacher and has been so involved in the community for so many years. I know he was very close to Matt, and he was my teacher in high school. I'm sure he was yours. Just a tremendous man. Perfect position for him. Thank you. Okay. And then information item update on IT.
This is just to let you guys know, they came in the 1st of April. Had a big crew in here, got the demolition done. They're a week ahead of schedule, maybe 10 days ahead of schedule. Debbie said today they're looking at maybe being in there by the end of August. So everything's moving along pretty quick. Debbie and I meet with them every 2 weeks, so they let us know what's going on. They've been real easy to work with. Had a couple minor things with power going out and things like that, but they've got on it and got it fixed real quick. So it's been real good for us on that, but it's moving right along. And as you see out there, they put paper down to keep the traffic down. There's no parking in the back, so everybody's got to park over in the overflow lot and stuff, but everything's going really well on that.
Good.
Mr. Bowen, I have one more thing.
Sure.
This morning, we had to complete a internal control training. We went over that, Debbie, myself, and Heather. We completed that this morning with Attorney Bossman. So everything's all done with that. So we're up to date to standards on it. If we have different employees come in, we will have to do that training again, but we've done that.
Thank you, Mr. Hensel. Financial questions from the board.
I don't have it.
Board comments.
Well, I want to thank you, Michael, for going along with what we feel is best. And you've always been wonderful to work with, so thank you very much. And I'm happy to see that everything's clicking along over there. If you give good explanations, then it certainly is appreciated.
Matt.
I think you all saw River Heritage opening was postponed due to weather.
Right.
That's probably later in May. Okay. You have lots of questions and I didn't know if you could maybe explain the citizens construction going on, because that is something that I'm getting calls about, and I want to make sure I'm explaining it correctly.
So at River Heritage Park, the property is actually owned by Citizens Energy Group, or their legal entity, and we have a lease. We lease 40 acres there. The Citizens plant there basically is an intake bringing in water from the White River and then servicing the water supply for, I don't know if that water is going to Indianapolis or Noblesville or Fishers. Obviously, we have our own water supply, but that's providing municipal water supply for the greater Indianapolis area. One of the things that Citizens is planning to do is expand that plant so that they have greater capacity to address the growing needs of the region. And when we were originally doing the development or the redevelopment and reimagination of River Heritage Park for the Clay Township Impact Program, I had actually reached out to Citizens, as our lease agreement requires, since we were going to do some variances to the original master plan that was adopted, I believe, in '98. And at the time, they had no plans. At least that's what they told me. So then we started working on our plans, and as we had something to present to them, I essentially got this, that's never necessarily a good sign when you start the conversations. And what we learned at that time, and it's quite possible between my first conversation before the bonds were passed and my subsequent conversation when we were presenting some of our concepts to them, that their plans had changed or they had created new plans. But initially, they didn't want us to do any development in River Heritage Park. And I'm like, you don't seem to understand. We've had this conversation. Because of the conversation we had, the township has issued a bond. Those funds can only be used in this park. We've got to come up with a solution that serves the community for the investment that's intended in this park. And Citizens was very amenable, and the improvements that are out in River Heritage Park are based on those conversations. But what they initially asked us to do is avoid any development on the westernmost end of the park. So basically from about the park where the existing River Heritage Park parking lot is to River Road. Because their initial idea was that they would develop a third, currently in front of their plant, in between where their actual operations are and River Road. You'll see a fenced-in area that looks, by all appearances, to be grass, but it actually are two underground reservoirs. So what their initial idea was that they would basically build a third reservoir in the open grass area that's between the parking lot and the road. And they weren't exactly sure because they hadn't developed the plans for it, and they're still working on those plans as we speak, to know exactly where the infrastructure is going to go, where piping might go, and what they wanted to make sure is that as we are developing the park, that we weren't putting something new right where they might have to do some of their development. So we purposely invested all the dollars to the east end of the park, created the trail networks and what you see today with the intent to stay out of their potential way for their expansion. Fast forward a little bit, there was a 1 acre partial that's immediately north of their plant on River Road that went for sale. And knowing at the time, believing that we were going to lose a portion of River Heritage Park, the park board passed a resolution of interest to purchase that property, thinking that could add additional green space, would help us because we ultimately want to create a perimeter trail that connects River Heritage Park to the existing city trail network, which ultimately will connect into the county's River Road Park, or Prather Park, as it's been recently renamed. And after we passed that resolution in interest and was starting the appraisal process, I got a phone call from Citizens again. And they indicated at that time that they felt there was a good possibility that if they purchased that property, they would be able to do their expansion to the north instead of to the south, minimizing or potentially completely avoiding any impact on River Heritage Park. It is my understanding, based on the conversation I had with my liaison at Citizens last week, actually, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, that they intend to have at least their preliminary plans completed by the end of May. So we should know exactly what their expansion plans are. I was given assurances that it wouldn't impact anything that we've done, but they weren't prepared to see anything else at that time. So hopefully in about a month and a half, I'll know exactly what their plans are, which will also impact our perimeter trail, because they were agreeable to providing us the necessary easements to develop that trail, but obviously they want to make sure that trail doesn't impact their expansion plans as well. So we'll work collaboratively with them on that. But that's what I know as of today, is that they will be expanding it. I would anticipate there's going to be some additional underground water storage there, but exactly what that looks like and how that impacts their greater site, I don't have the specifics of right now.
Thank you.
That was my comment.
My comment is real boring, but when do you think you're going to be finished with this insane construction here at the roundabout?
I've not been told anything on that yet, but they've made a lot of progress here in the last week. As you notice, they milled it down and paving, so we're probably getting pretty close to being done by the end of the month, I would say. Then we got the statues to be put in there whenever that takes place.
Now, it's a life-size statue of Doug Callahan, isn't it?
Probably.
My understanding?
Oh,
Is everyone aware of the statue?
I'm not.
So it is the whole roundabout center is a remembrance of home place. It is an homage to the original settlement. It's got a giant eagle. It's an Indiana artist just down the street. I forget what all the symbolism in it is, but it's very
Unique.
unique
And it sounds like appropriate.
and appropriate.
Good. Excellent. Any other announcements?
I got
Paul?
two of them. One of them is I got notified last week that the State Board of Accounts will be in May or June for an audit. Debbie and I are getting things ready for it right now.
It's better
Do a
than
lot of
Christmas
stuff
Eve.
remote. So we're coming in for it, and our next meeting will be May 16th. Hope it's not as long as all the others. And we have a little token for you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, how nice.
Oh, very cool.
Yep, very nice.
Well, that's okay. So it is a
Wow. Nice.
what do you call this?
Binder.
Embossed with the township logo.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much. This is wonderful. Appreciate it. All righty.
Appreciate everything you guys do for us.
Any other comments? Debbie, anything? Okay. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
So move.
Second? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned at 6:36. Thank you, everybody.